HBR, Harvard Business Review, said a 17% increase in performance for teams that have a strong sense of shared purpose and values. That's a lot. You think almost 20% of an increase in performance? Like, that's what businesses are trying to do right now. And yet we're going about it in like, oh, we'll be more productive versus how do I inspire you to be productive? How do I motivate you? Employees are 115% more engaged when their organization has a well-defined set of company values. What? That's a huge statistic too. We've seen more of this, especially with younger hires. 77% of respondents from Deloitte's Gen Z survey said that working at organizations whose values align with their own is important. And actually, this is just for Europe, but 59% of respondents in Europe for a Forbes study said that they would not work for an organization that does not share their values. And 55%, half of them, said that even a pay increase would not change their mind.
Hello, Workplace Wellness Champions. Welcome to episode 14 of the Virtual Vibe podcast, where we discuss HR strategies for a happy, healthy, and connected workforce in a work-from-home world. My name is David Howe. I'm the CEO of Bright Breaks. I have a beam of light coming over me today, so don't mind that, and the host of the Virtual Vibe. And today, I'm really excited to chat with Madeline Des Jardins. Madeline is the Global Senior Director of Internal Communications and Employee Engagement at Walkme. She previously spent some time at the Walt Disney Company and HireRight before joining Walkme. So welcome to the podcast, Madeline.
Thank you so much. So happy to be here. I love the Virtual Vibe and excited to vibe with you and talk about how we can make culture even stronger.
Totally. I love it. I really appreciate you joining. Madeline, we saw a webinar from Madeline on hr.com all around corporate values. And that's why we reached out and we were going to discuss corporate values today, including a plan to discover, launch, and sustain your own corporate values. So should be super jam-packed and exciting. And before we dive in, Madeline, would love to just hear a little bit about your background and what you're up to at Walkme.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I started my career at the Walt Disney Company at Disneyland Resort in Anaheim. 30,000 team members there, cast members they're called. And so it was a very big group of people. And I was on a very robust kind of internal comms team. And we did engagement, we did all these things. And then I went from there to HireRight, as you mentioned, which is a background screening company, 1,000 people. So much, much smaller, but global. And I was it. So I did all of communications, ended up taking on engagement there as well, and really looked at what it is to build culture and build engagement from the ground up, right? When you don't have any kind of structure. We went public while I was at HireRight as well. So that was a really major shift. And then I've been at Walkme now for 2 years, and we are a public company as well. We're about, HireRight was 3,000, Walkme is 1,000.
Yes.
And so I got even smaller. And so really looking at the dynamics too of those different corporate cultures and what, Disney is 125,000 globally. When you really think about it, that's a lot of people. And it's, I'm sure, much, much bigger now. That was a while ago. We won't date myself, but it's amazing to look at what culture looks like at different organizations of different sizes and how can you improve it and how can you connect on an individual level and also then on a scaled level, whether it's global or wherever you're focused. And I'm really passionate about just creating great experiences for people, making the world of work better. Exactly, what you're talking about here on the Virtual Vibe. How do we make things aligned and go back to our values and work together in new ways and better ways? And it's a really exciting time for that. So I'm thrilled to be part of it.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I can't think of a better person to chat with about this. And so you said you're the only person out of 3,000 person company kind of responsible for
so that was at HireRight. Now I luckily have a little bit of a team. So I have one person with me who, between the two of us, we do everything at Walkme. So we've got a lot of folks in Israel, which has been really challenging lately, but wonderful, wonderful group. And they are just so amazing and so resilient. And so we've got a huge base there, a lot in the US who are both in our offices and then remote. And then we've got employees in Japan, Singapore, Australia, London, Germany, France, all over the place. So we have really India, we just added. It's really exciting. We keep growing and we have a lot of really dynamic teams. And I think that's what excites me so much is you've got a lot of different people with a lot of diverse perspectives coming together. And we now have all these cool virtual tools where we can still meet together and communicate and share this culture. And so how do you do that in both kind of a hybrid where some people are in offices and remote where you're working with people all across the globe? And it's really exciting and it is a lot of work. But when you get intentional and you get authentic, it is really not as hard as it seems.
Yeah. Awesome. And so you have a kind of a powerful belief around value specifically. And what your quote I pulled is that your company culture cannot succeed without strong, authentic, and meaningful values. So walk me through that belief as best you can. And sorry for the pun on walk me. That wasn't intended.
It was great, actually. I love it. Yeah. So, like, I mean, you think about those words, like, what does it mean? They have to be strong. They have to be something that matters. They have to be meaningful. If people don't connect with them, what's the point, right? And then authentic. Authenticity is one of my personal values. It's how you show up in the world. It's what's true for you. And I think previously in work, we weren't always super authentic, right? We
Mhm.
had the ways that we did things and we said, this is how it is, and this is how we're going to move forward, and this is corporate life. And now more than ever, I think we're really thinking about what it is to spend a lot of our days at work and interact with people and make that really fulfilling and make it dynamic and special and contribute to your overall life versus just, oh, I go to my job and then I come home and that's just the thing
Mhm.
I do. How is this truly part of who you are? And that's what comes down to values, right? Like who we are is our values. And whether those are your individual values or your corporate values, it matters. And you can't really work together unless you know each other. And
Right.
so that's where values really come into play for me.
So what is like a value? Like how would you define and I guess specifically a corporate value is?
Yeah, I think actually the best way to start is with personal values, right? So,
Mm.
like, we think about what just is a value. It's something that defines how we make our choices, how we show up in the world, the ways that we behave. It's who we are, right? Like, I'll put you on the spot here. Like, what's one of your personal values? What's something that is true for you?
Yeah, I mean, one for me is gritty. So be gritty. So
Hmm,
I believe like
love that.
things take a lot of effort and time to
Mhm.
kind of achieve things, and that's actually one of our corporate values too. But that came from my own personal value set.
Well, there you go. Perfect example, right?
Yeah.
It's something that is true for you, but it can also be true for all of Bright Breaks. And so that's exactly kind of what we're looking at here. Like, what are your individual values across your company? And when you're looking at 1,000 people, 30,000 people, those are a lot of different values. And so, where do you start to see where those come together and where there's shared values? What are things that everybody kind of believes in? And maybe it's not one of their personal ones, but it's something that they agree with and they think is important. And that's where it starts becoming corporate, right? It's understanding corporate as kind of like community, really. Like we dumb it down so much to be like, oh, it's just business, but really it's a team of people working together, and a bunch of teams of people working together to fulfill a common goal. And so how do you get to that goal? How do you make your decisions? How do you show up at work? How do you interact with each other? How do you know, we talk about culture fit a lot. What does that actually mean? And so values are a great way to really identify that and say, okay, well, are you, for example, I mentioned authenticity earlier. For me, like,
Mhm.
are you showing up authentically? Are you, speaking up when you need to, and like sharing who you are? At Walkme, we have one that's taking ownership. That's really easy to say. Is someone taking ownership, or are they passing it along to someone else? And you can identify that and say, hey, even with we'll talk more about this later, but like values are a way to then really look at what is changing in your org. Are these people, are your leaders aligned with what you're doing overall? Because that's how you can point out and say, hey, David, uh, really appreciate your help with that the other day. I did notice that you passed this on to another person, and like taking ownership is one of our values. It's really important to us. I wonder if next time you can take ownership of it and really follow it through to the end rather than, passing it over to Jimmy. Like things
Mhm.
like that. It's so easy, and something that might be a really difficult conversation
Yeah.
can be made so much easier because you have this shared value you can reference and you can say, we've all agreed that this is something we care about.
Right.
And this is how we're going to act together at work. And so that's really a guide, a North Star, if you will,
Yeah.
to lead everybody forward together.
Yeah. Well said. Like a philosophy of sorts, and help
Yeah.
in the day to day decisions of like if I'm thinking in that example of a project, the
Yeah.
philosophy of Walkme is, hey, run with it, take ownership, go for it.
Yeah.
Super
Exactly.
cool. And I know you have some stats here, so I'm not putting you on the spot. But what does like some of the research say, or some of the statistics on why corporate values matter so much and why they're important?
Yeah, he prepped me, y'all, don't worry. So I have a few kind of stats that I'd love to share just because I think they're really, and these are just like surface, right? Like if you start really researching this, there is so much out there about how important values are and culture. And it's hard to measure, right? Like culture
Yeah.
is a very nebulous thing. We're going to talk about later, some of the ways you can measure it. But one of the things that we've seen is there's HBR, Harvard Business Review, said a 17% increase in performance for teams that have a strong sense of shared purpose and values. That's a
Wow.
lot. You
Yeah.
think almost 20% of an increase in performance? Like, that's
Mm.
what businesses are trying to do right now. And yet we're going about it and like, oh, we'll be more productive. versus how do I inspire you to be productive? How do I motivate you? Employees are 115% more engaged when their organization has a well-defined set of company values. What? That's a
Yeah.
huge statistic too. A couple now too, when we're really looking at, we've seen more of this, especially with younger hires. 77% of respondents from Deloitte's Gen Z survey said that working at organizations whose values align with their own is important. And actually, this is just for Europe, but 59% of respondents in Europe for a Forbes study said that they would not work for an organization that does not share their values. And 55%, half of them, said that even a pay increase would not change their mind.
Wow.
People are actually leaving organizations because they feel that dissonance. They're not feeling like either the company doesn't have values and you're in the Wild West and you're floating, you're just asked to do work and you're not really guided, or maybe even worse, you have values and you're not following them.
Right.
And that
Wow.
creates a real dissonance too, where you will see it's kind of a landmark if you're seeing some attrition and you're seeing people that are maybe even saying, hey, culture's an issue for me. That's a red flag. That's the canary in the coal mine, right? And say, okay, well, where are we not matching what we're saying?
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That is compelling. And what we're here to talk about is if you don't have values today, or if you are thinking about revamping your values, we're going to talk some tactics on how to do that. And if those stats don't convince you, I don't know what will. So, um, I guess we talked a little bit about like the personal values, how they can translate into the corporate values, and I think
Yeah.
that's important. The with your previous organization, Disneyland, I think there's a really interesting example there. And one of the things actually I noted that you didn't discuss in the webinar was how employees are called cast members, and I think that actually starts to set the stage right away by having that terminology. So, can you share more about Disneyland? I think that's an interesting story on how the values came together there.
You also said set the stage, which is a very Disney kind
Right.
of thing because they have on stage and backstage. So on stage is in the park if you're at Disneyland or Disney World, wherever, and backstage is the part that everybody thinks is really cool, and it's actually just like a lot of ride vehicles and other stuff.
Yeah.
It's not as exciting as it seems. I'll tell you. Sorry to break the fourth wall there, but you literally go on stage and you have a name badge and you are a cast member in a show. And so show is one of their values. They have 5 of them now. There were 4 when I was there. So again, I'm dating myself a little, but I think that's so important and so valuable the way that they show up. And I actually have stolen it from them. So I call everybody at Walkme as a team member, and it's capitalized just the way that we did at Disney. It's an identity. So you're not an individual contributor. You're not a colleague. You're not, you have an identity. You are a member of a team. You are part of this. And we call our leaders people leaders because they're leaders people. They're not just, managers. But with Disney in particular, that show value, that being on stage, that showing up is what makes the magic. It's what makes it special. And something that was really important from the beginning is they will tell you the values, them inside and out by the end of your training. And every single person at Disneyland is expected to maintain that show. So one of the things they tell you is everyone's in custodial. So custodial are the folks in the nice white uniforms who go out and they sweep and they keep everything very clean. But every single person with the name tag, every single cast member is expected to pick up trash if they see it. They kind of call it the Disney scoop. You kind of slide down and pick it up. But like I have been in the park and I've seen the president of the Disneyland Resort go down and pick up a piece of trash. And that's values in action, right? Like that is if show and creating this space that it feels like a performance and it feels like something really special and exciting. That's what guests are coming for. And so when every single person thinks that's their responsibility, that's magic. That's why Disney's a successful company, right? Like they care about the way that you're showing up and the way that you're acting. And that is to say, it's still authentic and it's still real, but you are putting on a show and it's special.
Yeah. Yeah. And to that point, like it can't be something that's just written on a wall somewhere. You have to live and breathe it. That starts at the very top.
Mhm.
And that's a really perfect example of that in action at Disneyland. So thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
So you have the concept of the 5 stars of corporate values. So what are the 5 stars of corporate values?
Yeah, so I kind of like a hotel. You want 5 stars, so
Yeah.
I went with that, and it literally spells out stars. So I'll we don't have a slide or anything, so it's a little hard to visualize. So I'll just kind of go through each one. It's simple, targeted, aspirational, real, and stable. So those are your stars. Simple is really it needs to be easy to recall, right? A lot of people, and I see this constantly, like 10 values or too many values. I like to joke that you have 5 fingers on your hand. So you should probably not have more than 5 values. I even talked about Disney added a 5th key. They call them the 4 keys. Now they're the 5 keys. They added inclusion a few years ago, I think. And so like, we'll talk about that too. You got to keep them fresh. They have to be real. Sometimes you might want to add, sometimes one might not be true anymore and you need to change it. So think about that, but try not, if you have 5 and you want to add a 6, maybe start thinking about are all of these still valid? Because the more that you add, people will not remember them, right? Like it's just too much to keep in your brain and too much to really stay aligned to. Also easy to understand comes under simple, especially depending on, if you are operating in one country, that's great. It's a little easier, but like, especially if you're global, think about words. We don't think about words enough. Like, what does this mean in different languages? Can this be offensive? Can this be confusing? Like, really think about values have different meanings to different people and different cultures too. So you really have to think about how is every single person at this company going to show up this way. So the simpler, the better, but also making sure that you're thinking about how people will understand them. Targeted, they have to be really actionable and backed by specific behaviors you want to encourage. So again, it's not just like, well, we want to have fun, so we're going to do fun as one of our values. That's not really a value, right? Like that is great. You can have fun, but like, is it playfulness? Is it, like show is almost like having, but like, what does that mean for your organization and how does it direct a behavior? Like, how will you actually show up? Like, show means you pick up trash, you keep this place clean, we're putting on a show. Like, it needs to mean something. And that's kind of that meaningful piece. And it should also be tied to accountability. So that's that targeted piece too. Are you putting it in your performance reviews? Is it part of your bonus? Like at Walkme, we actually have, when you do your performance review, a certain percentage of it is based on the Walkme way, our values. Are you showing up and living your values? And you're expected to actually explain each of the values, what you did this year to represent it. We want to make sure this is real for people and that it's actionable and not just something, again, like a poster on a wall. People don't know it. People don't care about it. Aspirational is the A. So this is really important. You want these to be real values. They want to be authentic and they want to be something that's real right now. But 1 or 2, if you have a few, could be a little more aspirational. So you want it to be something you're doing now, but there can be stuff that you're doing now, but you're not quite where you want to be. And so that can be a value. An example for Walkme is we have Work as One Walkme, and it's collaboration. Very simple, but we are a big global company and sometimes it's harder than you think to, collaborate with each other. And so that was an area we were doing well, but we knew we could do better. And we've had a huge transformation in the year and a half now that we've had these values since our launch. People sign off their emails Work as One Walkme, and it's like a rallying cry and people love it. And so you can also kind of help create culture with these values, but you have to be careful because it has to be founded in something real. And so then real is actually the next one. I did that to myself, not even on purpose. Discovered and not imposed. So they really need to come from a place of authenticity and be rooted in your real culture now. And then they should also reflect the collective values and priorities of all of your team members at every level. So again, it's not just what the CEO wants. Obviously, their voice is going to be very important, but it's also what your newest hire thinks and what your, somebody who's in a random role in another country, like you really want to think about every single individual at every single level and what this will mean for them and how to bring them in the journey. And then finally, stable. I talked about that they might change. These are living, breathing values. You want to keep them alive, but at the same time, you don't want to be doing a new values project and changing them every couple years because that's, like stepping on quicksand or something. Like you need something that's really going to be, if this is your North Star, it's got to stay at the same place in the sky to guide you. So think about, this has to be something that shouldn't be compromised. We talked a little already too about, if you have values and you're not actually living them, if your leadership are making decisions that are not aligned with those values, it's almost worse than if you didn't have any, right? And so making sure that they are real for you. I don't know if anyone's read Simon Sinek's Infinite Game. And it's all about like how do you think beyond today? How do you think beyond what your revenue is going to be next quarter and think about, what does this mean for us forever? So you don't want to jeopardize your values for short-term economic gain or for convenience. That's where the rubber really meets the road. And that's why you're going to really want to involve your ELT, your executives in this process, because they need to commit to these values too. And they will guide your decisions, because if you go against them, it will have huge ramifications across your culture.
Yeah. I mean, there's our masterclass condensed into about 5 minutes of value. So that's amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah. So many good points. The language you're using of the values and how that impacts other, most of our listeners are going to be global teams that have remote companies. So that's super valuable. And yeah, that's all awesome. So to get into like the weeds a little bit now,
Yeah.
so when we start with the discovery process, how do you start to discover your own corporate values as a leader or as a company leader?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like that start with why. Look around your company and start asking questions and start seeing, do we have value? If you don't have values to begin with, then that's easy. Let's make some. If you do, and I'll tell you, Walkme had values when I came. It's not like they didn't. And I said, these are great. Do people know them? And I started asking, and I asked who knew the values, and I talked about them, and people didn't really know them that well. Some people did, but for the most part, they weren't resonating and they weren't central to our culture. And so we started this project, and it takes a long time. So be prepared,
Mm,
in that discovery phase to commit. This is not a one and done thing. It is not something that will take you a few weeks or a month. It will take, I mean, I think for maybe a small company, a few months, but honestly, I think it's a 6 month to a year process. And like, think about that. And Walkme, we did it in 6 months. But like, if you're a company like, say, a Disney or something, I mean, I don't think they're going to change their values anytime soon. Again, they have a North
yeah,
Star, they're good. But like that's a really big initiative. And so really think about this as a journey that you're taking your employees on. And you're all doing it together. And so it's not something that is just a check the box activity. It is really a guiding forward of your entire culture, and it will take time.
yeah.
So make sure you're ready to make that commitment as part of the discovery as well. If you kind of get to that point where you say, okay, I think it's time that we, whether it's one value or all of them, start thinking about changes.
Right. And to come back to like the why, it's like, hey, good things take time, as cheesy as that sounds.
Yeah.
If you want to have higher performance, if you want to have more retention, more traction of talent, like it matters. So,
And it takes time. I think that people underestimate culture, and
right,
just say like, "Oh, well, I can make this announcement and my culture will change."
right,
Right? Like I sent an
right.
email, nothing's happening, and it really is. It's like you think about your own perspective. It takes a while to change your mind sometimes, or it takes a while to fully understand something and embrace it. And taking that journey and taking the time to bring everybody along, you will see the results. I guarantee it. The process of you kind of rushing along or doing the what you need to do versus what you could do, and really listening to your employees and really involving them, you will see the difference in both what values you end up with and how strong they are, and the adoption.
Yeah. Yeah. This isn't a chat GPT, tell me our five corporate values type exercise.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Exactly.
Um, so I kind of know the answer here. We talked about it, but
Yeah.
I guess should employees be part of the creation of values, but maybe more importantly, how to do that. So how do you actually get your employees involved in the creation of a new set of corporate values?
Yeah. It really is like you just have to start asking questions. You have to start caring about the answers, right? And I think the best way obviously to do that is focus groups and asking. So that might look a little different depending on your organization. You can do, everything from a huge organizational health survey or a pulse survey, which I definitely recommend, to, little pulses, focus groups, team feedback, open feedback. There's so many ways that you can kind of open the door for this. But the way that I highly recommend is kind of looking at focus groups and then doing a major global survey. And so at Walkme in particular, we held 21 focus groups broken up by function and location globally, to really try to capture dynamics across our culture and understand, hearing from as many people as possible. We ended up engaging 20% of our global population, which I think is a pretty good amount for like direct conversation, right?
Yeah.
So those are people that like sat in a room and we like hashed it out, right? And
Wow.
so some of this too is, you want to start asking things like, what makes you proud to work here? What behaviors do you like in our workplace? What behaviors are frustrating in our workplace? How do members of your team handle disagreements? Sometimes it's like how we work together well will tell you something, but how you don't work together well will tell you something entirely different, right? And so explore
Yeah.
both sides of that. How do you make decisions? What guides you in making decisions? When you're faced with a challenge, what do you do? What's the best way to be successful here? Asking those kinds of open ended questions and just letting people talk, and taking down notes, and seeing what's coming up, and then taking that back end perspective and seeing, okay, so we had all these focus groups. What are the same themes coming up? What are the same
Mm,
frustrations or the same excitements or the same values, if you will? And that's where you start pulling in, okay, collaboration is really key. Like that's such a basic one, but what does that mean for us? And you have all this data already from people's own words that you can use to then go in and look at, like, okay, so now we have some ideas, and that's where you bring it to everybody through something like a major survey where they can then add their feedback and kind of say, yes, this makes sense to me, or it doesn't, and you can go from there.
mm. How eye-opening was that for you to go through that process? Like, I'm guessing you learned a ton in a
Yes.
relatively short amount of time.
Yeah, and it was great for me too because I identified that this was a major project I wanted to do not long after entering WalkMe, and so it was a great way too for me to get to know the culture well and to get to know
Yeah.
our teams. I think for any HR team in particular is going to be managing this, but where do you get your leaders involved too, and have them talk with their teams directly about it, and what is their values on their team, and how does that go, and send you feedback. Like think about how you can engage other folks as well, and you will be surprised. I think
Yeah.
there are things that you will not be surprised by, and there will be things that you're like, oh, I never thought about it this way. Or like one of ours is embrace a growth mindset. And so really thinking about asking
Mm.
questions and getting curious. And that was something that was a great surprise, right? Of like how curious our org is and we want to learn and we want to grow. And like, again, something simple, but like that's not all cultures. Not everybody wants to ask the question and get to the heart of things and think that way. And what does that mean for us then from there? And so you will be surprised sometimes. And there may be things that you're like, whoa, this is a huge cultural issue that we didn't know we had. And you may find out just things that you might need to look at beyond values too, for other
Yeah.
initiatives.
Yeah. Awesome. And okay, so that sounds like an amazing experience. Now, kind of the next step in that process is getting exec buy-in. So how does that look? What does that
Yeah.
process look like in doing so?
So, I mean, I'm telling you to take every single person in your company on this journey. Your executives are going to be like right there with you, leading the way, and you want that at every single step of this process. Like,
Okay.
my best advice is don't do anything forward with this unless you've checked in with your exec team, first, and specifically your
Right.
CEO and the people that will be making major decisions. Because again, if they don't believe in these values, you have a real
Mm.
problem. And you don't want to go out to the org and be saying, okay, well, you told us all of these things. And then later be like, but our CEO wants to go with this value. Right. So you want to make sure there's alignment completely the entire
Yeah.
time. So that does feel really authentic and real. And that, if there's anything that your executive team says, we really don't want to do that value, or that's not who we are, or like whatever, you want to address that really
Yeah.
early. And if there
Mm.
is something that say, we didn't have this at WalkMe, but like if they said, hey, we want to make sure that creativity is one of our values. You can take that from the beginning and kind of scope it out and see what the response is. And then you can come back and say, hey, creativity landed great. We're going to do it. Or people don't really feel like creativity is a value for us. Like, let's talk about it. And
Mm.
so, like, really making sure that you're having those conversations, ideally with the entire executive team, because they will be the ones really responsible for holding the line on these values, but specifically with your CHRO, your CEO, anybody who's really key in this process. And I would say, too, you do your focus groups, you kind of get your idea of my proposal is 10, maybe 15 values that you can then take to like an OHS, a survey that you will bring out. And so
Mm.
you'll say, collaboration, or even ideally you say work as one WalkMe or whatever you're thinking of calling it. And you can see
Yeah.
you'll get back feedback about whether it makes sense. Again, if it's simple enough that people oh, I did a little thumbs up on here.
No, I saw that. Yeah. Cool.
Sorry. My little emoji came out. I was ticking things on my fingers. So
Yeah.
you'll see, is it authentic and is it real, but is it simple enough to work? So if you're going to call it something other than, whatever the word is, make sure you're using that in the
Mm.
survey so people can react to that. Because then
Mm.
if you change it and you said, well, the value is collaboration, but we're going to call it, whatever, that might not
Yeah.
resonate with people anymore. So you want to
Mm.
really be explicit with what you're doing. And then ideally have some like open space where they can react to it too. And you want to ask, is this a
Mm.
value we currently have? And is this a value you think we should have? Those are kind of two
Mm.
separate questions. That's something I did learn. We just kind of asked, hey, does this value work? And we got a lot of people responding. This is what really surprised me, where they would say, specifically again for that collaboration one, we
Yeah.
do okay, but it's not great. And I think we could be really good. And so that was telling
Right.
us this is a gap, but it's something we care about, right? It is a value to us. We're just not doing it that well. So let's
Right.
call it a value and then see how we can do it better.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So a lot of validation along the way. It's not a take this and then go to this stage. It's involving everyone throughout the entire process.
And that's why it took
And
time, right? That's
yeah.
why we said it's going to be
Yeah.
6 months or more. Like, this is not a fast
Yeah.
process. And you also want to validate, not just with your executives, but like, do you have culture groups? Do you have ERGs or resource groups? Do you have culture champions? Do you have, you want your HR team to see it? Like, you want to get as many eyes and hands on this as possible in that validation process to make sure that this is truly the right thing. And you can't really do
Yeah.
enough of it because you're also pre-communicating. If you think about it that way, you're pre-launch.
Yeah.
So people
Exactly.
will know
Yeah.
this is coming and they'll be excited about it before you even launch. So you're
Yeah.
it's part of the process.
Yeah, exactly. And so with Walkme specifically, how long did it actually take, and what was like the end result of the process?
Yeah, so it was about a 6-month process, a little more.
Okay.
I joined Walkme in February of 2021, and we launched the values in December of 2021. So I didn't start on day one, obviously, but
Yeah.
a couple months in is when I really kicked things off, and it takes time. And I think if you spend that time, it's worth it. And so we came out with 4 values. We have act with empathy, embrace a growth mindset, take ownership, and work as one Walkme. And so those are simple, right? Like they're nothing revolutionary, nothing crazy, but they're ours. And so they are the way that it makes sense for us. Like work as one Walkme. We don't talk about it as collaboration, but that's obviously what it
Mm,
means. How are we working as one Walkme? How do we support each other? How do we show up for each other? And then within that too, thinking about descriptions of like, what does this mean for you? And clarifying it really clearly. Because when you say something like that, if we just say, act with empathy is pretty clear, but say like embrace a growth mindset. What does that really mean? How do I do that at
mm,
work? What does that look
yeah.
like? And so really
Mm,
being clear about it's asking questions, not just of your fellow team members, but of your customers. Are you interested in what they want? Are you asking questions of them? That's
mm,
important. And that's something that we can all do better. And so really outlining those behaviors again that tie back to the value. And that's something I think we did a great job of. And I will say, my kind of pride here is we had a huge sales kickoff event this year, and it was totally themed to our values, and I was 0% involved. So
awesome.
that was like,
That's amazing.
that's when you've hit success, right? Like
Yeah.
we'll talk about success
Yes.
measurements, but some of it is just like you feel it, you see it,
Yeah.
it's active, it's there. Your CEO's talking about it, people are bringing it up in conversation. That's when it really becomes real for you.
Yeah. That's amazing. That must have been a fulfilling moment for you to see that in action.
It was incredible. And there were like huge
Yeah.
banners and like all it was all one Walk Me themed. And it was just truly a testament to how much these values mean to us. And I'll say too, not to, go to a dark place, but like we have the war in Israel, and it's been really, really
Yeah.
hard for our team members, and people are in it every single day, and they have family members. And that is, things will happen in your org, right? Like
Mm,
life happens. We just went through COVID, for goodness sakes. Like you
yeah.
never know what's going to come up. And if you have really strong values, Work as One Walk Me became this, we're team Walk Me. This is how we show up for each other.
Right.
This is how we, people were signing off their, I'll never forget that right after October 7th, people were literally signing their emails One Walk Me. And
Wow.
I was crying. Like it was just
Yeah.
so powerful. And this was really, I mean, not a whole lot. I mean, within a year of launching these values, these are so ingrained that this is what people clung to when things got really hard. When things
Right.
were at their worst, this is how we supported each other. And we went back to our heart and our values. And so that's really where like you're going to get the productivity boost, you're going to get all these other things, but really what it's
Yeah.
about is having that to fall back on so that when times get
Yeah.
tough, your team is united.
Yeah. I mean, that can't be, there's probably no better story than like how the values actually can truly impact the company. So that's amazing. Appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah.
Um, wow. Okay. This is,
Yeah, I
yeah,
know it's
this
a
is,
heavy one, but it's really, I mean, it shows you
yeah,
how it
it
can
shows it
feel.
exactly how it's
Yeah,
exactly. It shows it in action. And like you're saying, there are going to be hard times. There'll be more hard times in the future. It's hard to say what they'll be, but there's always going to be difficult times, whether it's company performance, whether it's
yeah,
stuff like that. It's so having the values in place helps, and I can see that in action. Um, so once you actually have the values, how do you begin to actually roll these out to the company? What does that actually look like, and what did it look like at WalkMe?
yeah. So you want to think about launch. What does that look like for you? I have a bunch of different, I mean, I'm a communications person at heart too. So
Yeah,
I'm really thinking about, you have live comms, you have virtual, like how's your CEO talking about it? Are you doing all hands meetings? Do you do a big launch event? We actually did connect sessions, we called them, where we brought new hires together too. So this is an ongoing thing that new hires get now. When they enter, they do
yeah,
a connect session. They learn about our values. They get to talk with established team members. We launched that for everyone when the values launched. So everybody got to do a connect session to learn about the values, to talk with each other. And now we use that as a model for our new employees. So think too about just ways you can bring people together to talk about it. What does it look like on individual teams? How are you getting leaders to talk about it on their teams?
mm,
Are you doing videos featuring your values? Is your CEO talking about them? And then, you want to do some swag or some giveaways. You can put a poster on the wall. Something that we did at High Rate actually that I really loved is we had little stickers that went on your badges. So like
okay.
if you're badging into the office, the sticker has your
Ah,
values on it, right? Like you see it every day. That's something you're literally like mouse pads or things that you can like it's not just a pen that you're going to lose or something. It's something that you see every day. Like think about
Mm.
those opportunities to make it last and to make it really visible for people. And, launch is just the beginning, and then you go from there and really live and breathe them every day.
Yeah. Okay. Um, that is cool. And that makes a lot of sense. Like, it's kind of cheesy, but like a coffee mug or
Yeah.
something or whatever, you have it in front of you all the time.
Yeah.
It's something that's a constant reminder.
Yeah.
And you mentioned leaders. So that's obviously one important piece of it is the leaders living and breathing that with their team. So how do you activate leaders to actually live and breathe it?
And that's again this whole journey, right? It's not an HR
Yeah.
project, it's not an HR journey. It
Yeah.
is everybody. And so how do you get, your CEO to be picking up trash? Like what does that look
Yeah.
like for your company, right? And like really living the values. And I think taking the time to bring those leaders on the journey, doing special sessions with them, maybe special leader focus groups, like really think about how they can feel part of this, and again then bring it to their teams, like put them in the driver's seat, give the values to
Mhm.
them and say, hey, how do you want to approach this with your team? How do you bring this to them? Talk about what it means. We've then gone into like even within functions. So we call it the Walkme way. What do those 4 values mean within your function, right? It's going to be a little different for each one. You'll notice customer service is not one of our values. That's a very popular one. Highly recommend
Mhm.
not doing that, actually. You should have values that all go to the customer and all go to the employee and go to like your values are not about one particular stakeholder. They're about everything the
Mhm.
way, like for us, it's like I work as one Walkme for my customer. I act with empathy towards my customer. And then you can really drill down what does that look like depending on the role. And so I think
Mhm.
that is something that leaders can really get involved in crafting what it looks like for their function or for their team. And then they're feeling that sense of ownership where they're going to be really passionate about it and really drive it. And I think too, just like having them talk about it. I know that sounds so simple. We think about talk as fluff, but it's like the more that we discuss these things and what they truly mean for us on an individual level, that's where it goes from personal to corporate, right? And
Mhm.
again, then too, highlighting those leaders that are role models, the leaders that are talking
Mhm.
about the values, that are doing these things, profile them, have them lead a section of your town hall and talk about values instead of the HR team, right? Like think about
Mhm.
how you can really put people in that place of they're presenting them versus your traditional folks.
Mhm. And you said a really good point there too. It's not just about for the team, it's also thinking about your customers. And you said like earlier, you said a sales example where it's the growth mindset, asking questions, learning, helping
Yeah.
solve their problems. That it applies obviously to customers, which is I think a double bonus of
Yeah.
sorts of values.
I think you kind of
Yeah.
pigeonhole yourself if you have customer service as a value. Then it's like
Right.
that one's about the customer. And it's like, no, all your values should be about like, how do you do all of these
Right.
things in every interaction you have, whether it's with a stakeholder, a prospect, a customer, a fellow team member? It doesn't matter. You should be living all your values all the time.
Yeah, exactly. And what are common pitfalls that you see or you've seen, with creation or implementation of these values?
Yeah, I think we've gone through some of them, like not making them actionable. They have to be tied to behaviors. We've talked about like kind of the gap between the ideal and current culture. If you're not living your values, that's real bad. Skipping steps in the validation and approval process. Again, if you're not
Mm.
bringing your exec team along, if you're not, if you're over. Uh, Moving a little too fast, that can lead to a lot of problems. Like take your time, do it slowly, do it intentionally, think about every step of this. Under communicating is a big one. As you go through every step, are you letting everyone know? Again, it's bringing people along in the journey. It's not just what you're doing, it's letting people know what you're doing. And you think you're communicating, but I promise you, you're not communicating enough. That's something that we all kind of do. Where like I sent the email, and it's like the
Yeah.
email is not enough. You need a Slack message. You need a video. You need like how can we really think about it in a dynamic way? And this is a journey. So if you're taking 6 months or maybe even more to do this, like give updates, let people know where you're in on the process. They're part of it. And then that actually really makes them feel that ownership once they're out. And then the last one really is something that I learned from Walkme as well is like different departments or geographies having their own values. So you may see
Mm.
that. And that was actually one of the things too that led me to think, I think that these values aren't resonating. Our customer service group had their own values, right? Like that were
Mm.
separate from the global values. And I was like, that doesn't make sense, right? And
Right.
so thinking about that too and making sure everyone is aligned. So if groups do want their own values, how can those be an extension of what you're already doing, right? Like, okay, work as one Walkme on customer service. What does that look like? Kind of like we talked about before with the leaders. And so taking that time to make sure everyone's aligned, that's global culture. Because otherwise you're dealing with a bunch of kind of siloed cultures, which is not going to get you what you need.
Right. Yes. Great advice. And I guess to look at the inverse of this, like What if you're seeing that a employee or a department is not living these values? What are the action items there for those folks?
And that's where, leadership comes in, and maybe even HR comes in, is like, this is why, like, we have it in our reviews. We have it as part, like, this is where you understand culture fit. And this is where you understand, are you living it? And if you're not, or if there are leaders that are not, or individuals, how do you approach that? You sit down with them and have a real conversation, have the appropriate person, whether it is a, HR business partner or their leader, ideally their leader, and someone who's really coming to them on their level and saying, hey, and call it specific things, right? Like, hey, I saw the other day, we act with empathy here, and you made a comment that didn't feel very empathetic to me. Can we talk about that? Right? Like, have specific examples of when people are or are not living values and address those. And the ones that are, celebrate them, right? Like, do recognition, do profiles, find ways to really highlight the people that are doing it right, so that people know what good looks like.
Mm. And I think Walkme has a really interesting way of doing that. So what does that look like in terms of recognizing the values at Walkme?
Thank you. Yeah. We actually just launched a new reward and recognition platform called Work Proud. So I'm very excited about that. But,
Awesome.
beyond that too, it's like we have the Walk Me Way Awards. So we have quarterly awards that we do. One person per value wins, and our CEO announces it at our quarterly town hall. And it's a really big deal. And they get $1,000 and recognition, and it goes on social media. And it's just like a great way to really feature folks. And a lot of our departments do that as well on smaller scales, but then we have the global ones, which are like a really big deal. We do constant recognition, always tied to a value. If you're doing recognition, it should be part of your value. Like, were they acting with empathy? Were they doing what? Like, make sure that it's tied to that, because again, it's reinforcing those behaviors. Call outs and weekly newsletters or intranet. We have the Walk Me Weekly, which I did to myself. So we have a weekly newsletter, which usually I would not recommend, but we are a very fast-paced business. We move quickly. We've got a lot of different teams. So weekly made sense for us, which is wild. But things like that, think about what works for your team. What works for your team might be a little different. And that's, again, where like this works for any size company, right? Like, it doesn't matter if you're 30,000 or 1,000 or 250, right? Like, this is a process, and it might look a little different. You might use different tools, or, you might only be talking to this group versus everybody at a time. But how do you think about bringing everybody on this journey and then celebrating it as you do it? Pick those people to feature in a video, share team wins, share spotlights, and make recognition part of every day.
Right. And it doesn't need to be super expensive. You don't need the full reward and recognition system. You can have as simple as shoutouts in Slack, as you're saying, to kind of just continually reinforce it. And I'm sure there's some stat out there around how many times people need to hear something to like really have it stick.
Yeah.
But doing something like, for Bright Break specifically, we have a kind of an update every week in Slack, and we always recognize one value and share that. So like little things, but it can go a long way, as you're saying.
Yeah, it's exactly that, right? Like, the more that you talk about it and the more that you just say it starts resonating, and people remember it. And it's like, well, however, I don't know what the stat is. I'm sure there is one, but like, however many times you think someone needs to hear something to remember it, it's more than that. So just keep that in mind.
Good life advice too.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. Awesome. This has been like super jam-packed, super valuable. So I really appreciate you doing this, Madeline. This is awesome. I hope everyone, gets to hear this. And if you're thinking about creating corporate values, this is definitely the podcast to listen to. So if I were to ask kind of one final question, what's kind of one final thought or one piece of advice you would leave with HR leaders or leaders thinking about, creating their corporate values?
Yeah. Culture's alive, right? Like, it's a living, breathing thing. And your values, I think, are the key to your culture. We talked about, you can't succeed without, meaningful, strong, authentic values. Keep that alive, keep it moving and breathing, and think about where it moves. And like, your business priorities will change, your company may change, your leadership may change, you're hiring people all the time, people are leaving. Like, that's, an organization is alive, right? And so how do your values stay alive with it and still remain your North Star, but are growing and changing with your team? And maybe, the value stays the same, but maybe some of the behaviors change, or the way that you talk about it. Like, just think about it as, this might be like a little cheesy, but like almost like a tree or something, right? Like, you plant it and you watch it grow, and it takes time. You can't just be like, oh, magic, the tree is big now. Like, it doesn't happen, right? Like, you have to take the time to wait for it to grow, and culture takes time to grow. And so plant the seed and water it and take care of it. And the more gardeners you can get involved, the healthier that tree is going to be, right? So bring everybody involved, and really think about, do you need to trim here? Is there something we need to do to cultivate this tree? Like, really think about this as a living organism that is part of who you are. It is your, like, we have 1,040 people at Walkme right now, and we have one team Walkme, right? And like, that's the work is one Walkme. Like, we are team Walkme. And what does that mean? Like, I think of team Walkme as its own identity that we all share. And so that's our tree. And how do we cultivate it and keep it moving? And it's not something you can do on your own either. So really bring everybody along and go gardening.
Amazing. I love that. Well, thank you, Madeline. This has been amazing. As we mentioned, there's another full webinar on this on hr.com that I'll share the link in the podcast notes on. If folks want to kind of connect with you, where could they find you?
Yeah, LinkedIn is probably the best way. If you can spell my very French last name, it'll be in the podcast notes. But Madeline Des Jardins, check me out on LinkedIn. You can also email me at madeline.desjardins, good luck spelling it, at walkme.com. For your Canadian listeners, they've got it. They're prepared.
Yes.
But yeah, please reach out. I am very happy to sit and talk. If you want to meet, if you want to, talk about what you're doing, I'm very happy to do that. I think this is such an exciting time to be bringing culture alive at companies. And my little LinkedIn thing says, I'm going to be cheesy for a second, it doesn't have my title. It has changing how we work together. And that is totally a pun. How we work together and how we work together. But like, really, that's what I care about. And that's what I'm here to do. So please reach out. I'd love to hear from you. And I'm here to help.
Okay. That's an amazing offer. Thank you so much, Madeline. And thank you everyone for tuning in. Hope you have a great week, and we'll talk soon. Take care. Bye.